Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&A. I got to start out by once again thanking everybody that I met at Retro World Expo. It was such a blast hanging out with all of you. And the only thing I'd like to add is a few people said that when they came over, they saw a bunch of people at the table and didn't want to bother anybody. But by all means, just walk right up and join the group. It was just a laid back bunch of nerds talking retro shop all weekend long. I obviously mean that with nothing but love, but yeah, there was certainly no formal or unapproachable things going on. It was always just a bunch of people hanging out and talking. So please feel free to just step right up. And if you come up in the middle of a conversation, we all know that you're probably part of the group. So just jump right in. It was always wonderful to see that. Always great to see new people make friends at these places. And, especially when we all have common interests and live sort of around each other, it's cool to introduce people to each other. So thank you again. I really love doing these things. And I hope to meet even more of you over in the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. But anyway, let's jump right into the questions. First up, over on Subscribestar, Buster D had a question about running emulators on PC CRT monitors, but making them look like essentially 240p RGB monitors. And this is something that some trusted members of the community have been talking to me about for a while. And I mean trusted members of the community respectfully. It's just not some random forum post. It's people that have a deep expert understanding of how these things work. And I just haven't gotten around to testing it. In fact, I think I'm going to use this as an excuse to go hunt down a really nice VGA monitor, like one of the ones that used to be down at iFix. But essentially what it accomplishes is being able to take a 480p only VGA monitor, something that's not compatible with 15 kilohertz, and run emulation on it at 120 hertz to look like a 240p RGB monitor. And the pictures that I've been sent of this look pretty darn close to what a PVM looks like. And even more importantly, the comparisons that I've seen are from like a garbage bin VGA monitor, CRT monitor, that was pulled out of the bin, hooked up to one of these, and look really close to a PVM. So that would really open up a whole other world of gaming for people. And I think the only reason that I haven't gotten really into it is because, respectfully, I just don't like to use software emulation. I really like to use FPGAs or original hardware. But the question that Buster D is asking and the question that I'm asking is, I wonder if a scaler can be made to do this in a zero lag scenario. So essentially, it would be a very low volume item. It's not going to be something that everybody in the retro gaming world would want. But if you're able to get your hands on a PC CRT, you essentially would be able to plug in this mythical device that doesn't exist yet. You'd be able to plug in your SCART cable and then have it output VGA to a VGA monitor in a way that would look just like 240p. So I'm researching it. I'm talking to a bunch of different people. I think the biggest speed bump is me because I don't have a deep technical understanding of what it would need to do that. But I'm looking into it, and if it's feasible, it's most likely going to end up being an open source project. Just because this isn't something, maybe I'm dead wrong on this, but I just don't feel like this is something that would sell 1,000 units of. So yeah, I think that might be another reason why some manufacturers wouldn't consider doing that yet. They're going to stick with the HDMI products because it's going to help more people. But I do think if it's possible, this is a product worth looking into. So I'll talk to some people about it and see what we can do. But something the size of like the RetroTink transcoder, where you basically just put SCART in and have a VGA port on the back with some audio ports. These obviously is component, but I think something like that could do this would be amazing. So I'll look into it. Fingers crossed that this is something possible. And if any devs are listening to this, please contact me and I'll be able to put you in touch with the right people to kind of make something like this happen. So excellent question. And I wish I was smart enough to answer it completely right now. Next, Brento had a question about a JVC D-Series curved CRT, same exact one I have behind me, and he noticed that there's some geometry issues that can't be fixed via the service menu. Very specifically, instead of something smooth scrolling, it's kind of like warbling. So for anybody listening, I was just, making weird hand motions trying to describe it. But basically, that may or may not be fixed with a capacitor replacement, but there's a good chance that you'll never be able to fix it without a capacitor replacement. Because that's the whole thing that Pat, the BVM tech, was talking about, is you can't calibrate any CRT to bad capacitors, because not only would you be, or aging capacitors even, because not only would you not be able to set the geometry right, but when you eventually replace the caps, it's going to be way off now. So my friend Jose and I replaced the caps on that one. There's still a few left because I ordered the wrong ones for a few. So he's going to come back soon and do that, as well as an RGB mod to it. And then after that, we're going to check it out again, but it's still doing the same thing yours is doing after the cap replacement. Now, once again, I missed like 5 or 6 caps, so maybe after replacing those, it won't do it, but I have a feeling that we're going to have to go into the service menu, I almost said service manual, and tweak it afterwards. So if you've already been messing around in the service menu, I would make sure that you wrote down all the original settings and probably put it back to that. Then go and do a full recap. And we're finalizing the cap list for it. It's going to be off. I could send it to you if you want, but you're going to end up losing like $15 on unneeded caps, and you'll know which ones they are. They're the ones that are going to be like this big instead of this big. But, I could send you the basic version we have now if you want to go through it. But it's obviously a very big job. You have to discharge the CRT and be careful, or obviously the please don't die warning that I always put out there. But for me personally, I love that CRT, and this is going to be something that I'm going to keep forever. Somebody actually offered a 36-inch version to me, and I would really like that one as well. And then, probably my buddy Beast really wants one of these, so I'll get the 36-inch. I'll do the same thing, decide which one I like better for whatever reasons, and then probably just give the other to Beast. But they're awesome TVs, and it's getting to the point now where we're really nailing down the best consumer grade CRTs to grab. So some quick context, even though it's not at all part of your question, any CRT is a win, period, end of story. Any CRT that's still working without burn-in, that's always a win. But there are ones that tend to perform a little bit better than others, some that are more versatile that could be RGB modded, even others where you could pull the tube out and stick it in an arcade monitor if you'd like. So this JVC-D series is one of a long list of really, really great CRTs. So definitely hold on to it, or if you're going to sell it, sell it to a fair price, for a fair price to another member of the community that's not going to try to scalp it. But these are, there's a bunch of Sonys. I keep forgetting the models, but it's basically where the Sonys with that look similar to those. They have a black case, and the back of the case drops off right at the back of the CRT, so they're kind of like big front, skinny back type of things. And then there's some Toshiba, some JVC, RCA even has a few great models. I'll try to compile a list of stuff like that, but basically you got yourself a great CRT, one of a list of ones that you should be holding on to. So if you're going to spend the time and effort and money and annoyance, to be honest, to do a cap replacement, you've got one of the ones that's worth doing it on. Next, It's a Serial Wow has 2 questions this week. First, they were wondering if I had a chance to test the RetroTink RGB2 component against other solutions like the Shiny Bow, and if I noticed any difference. I haven't been able to put it on a scope, and I won't be able to for months. I have stuff that I need to get done before the end of the year, but what I can say is this has been performing excellently. If I do throw it on the scope, which I'm going to try to do soon, it's just going to be a basic like, hey, here's proof this thing's performing well. But I'm not really going to do a deep dive against the Shiny Bow, because then I'd have to test every console and every scenario, and there's no way I have the time for that. But they're both excellent. This one's just cheaper, and you're directly supporting members of the retro gaming community by buying this. So I'm definitely going to be leaning towards the RetroTink version over the Shiny Bow just for that reason. If you already own a Shiny Bow, don't worry. It's freaking awesome. You got a good one. Don't you worry about it. The next question. In the current setup, they have an older model 4-port G-Comp daisy chained into the newer 8-port G-Comp. But they've noticed when all the consoles are powered off, a flickering screen is displayed on their Sony Wega. Interesting. So they said it seems to go away once a console is powered on and doesn't interfere with the auto switching, but they were concerned it would do damage to the 8-port switch over time. That's really interesting. So I think you need to nail down exactly where the problem's coming from. So first start by unplugging the 4-port switch and see if you still get the flickering. I read your question twice. I don't think you said that, but basically I would try that first and just see if you could pin down exactly where the problem is coming from. Maybe it's a console that's that's doing something. Do you have all of OEM power supplies? And if they're not OEM power supplies, are they the ones that we've been testing that we think are pretty good? So I would really dig into that and really kind of check and see if you could nail down where the problem's coming from and then go from there. But I've never seen that with any of the G switches, the comp or the SCART. I've seen it with a Hydra before, which is why one of the reasons I try to stay away from those. That kind of freaked me out. But so yeah, hopefully that answers all your questions. And let me know if you nail down exactly what is causing the interference issue. Cam had a great question that I'm not sure that I know the best answer to. The question is about CRT storage. Is it safe to store a CRT in a garage for a few months, or could keeping it somewhere that isn't temperature and humidity controlled cause problems? It would be in a box full of silica packets. Temperature in the area shouldn't be terrible during this time, 60s to mid-90s. The CRT in question is a BVM, which was recently calibrated by Pat Gravier. So I would say the good practice would be to keep it in a temperature-controlled environment, but I think the temperatures that would affect electronic components, obviously extremely high humidity would be bad for capacitors and a lot of the other components, but other than that, I'm not really sure if there would be a major problem. That TV behind me was kept all winter in a garage, and I mean, it seems to be doing fine still. I've had lots of equipment stored that way, but I don't know. I just don't know what the repercussions would be for like one summer. There's scenarios where there's obviously going to be pretty immediate difference. You leave a dirty car baking out in the sun all summer in Florida, you're going to ruin the paint job. But I don't think it's like that with a lot of electronic components. So I guess it's good practice to try to keep it as temperate as possible. Having those silica packets in there can't hurt. So yeah, I would think it's okay. I would do it. I personally would be comfortable doing it. But you might want to double check with more electronics experts and see if there's anything I'm missing where there's like an if or but scenario. Like it's totally fine as long as, or, you should be good as long as you don't, one of those scenarios. But for me, I've done it before. I've had good luck and never had any real permanent damage show that I've noticed. So sorry I couldn't give you a more direct answer for it. Doomleg had a question, and the answer is kind of funny and a little ironic, but the question is, will the Mega Drive or Genesis 2 version of the RAD2X cable work with a Model 1 Genesis using the Genesis 1 to 2 stereo patch cable from Retro Gaming Cables? Because of the way they're wired, no. So if you would like to use the Genesis 2 RAD2X cable with a Model 1 Genesis in stereo, you'll have to end up buying the Retro Access version of that. And that's the one with a very short cable on the console end. So it's the Genesis 1 plug, there's a very short pigtail, and then the receptacle side is Genesis 2. And that one should have everything connected, because the purpose of that is to turn the Genesis 1 port into a Genesis 2 port. So it should have every pin wired up. And then, of course, you plug the stereo connector into the headphone jack in front. So that would work. And also for Sega Master System support, you can get the HD Retrovision cable from Castlemania Games. So it's kind of funny that Retro Gaming Cable's RAD2X cable would need two different adapters from two different vendors in order to do that. Castlemania might be even stocking the Retro Access ones. I'm not sure. That would be cool and easy for people if they did. But yeah, kind of a weird answer to that. But it's all just because of how the Retro Gaming Cables ones are wired. And I believe they've already manufactured a bunch, so I'm not sure they'd be willing to change that right away. So yeah, strange scenario, but kind of is what it is. Cam asked, in what situations would a setup benefit from both a RetroTink 2X and an OSSC? Well, first and foremost, if you get a very cheap HDMI to component video converter, you could then use the composite and S-video connections of the RetroTink into the OSSC and still take advantage of the low-pass filter on the OSSC and all the scaling. So you'd essentially put the RetroTink 2X into pass-through mode, and then send it right out as 240p, and then let the OSSC handle it as if it were basically a component or RGB signal. The other advantage of that is if you run into scenarios in which your OSSC is not compatible with the device, you could just use the RetroTink. This is especially helpful if you're using HD Retrovision cables, because those just plug into either. Then there are some TVs, some older flat screen TVs are still not really compatible with any mode of the OSSC except 2X. And, in that case, you wouldn't need an OSSC at all. But really, in all of my testing, any TV in the past, heck, it's got to be 5 to 8 years now, has worked in at least 720p mode, but most of them even work in 4x 1080p mode. It's just 5x mode some TVs still have issues with. So there's got to be more scenarios than that, but those are pretty much the two main ones. Using it to route composite in S-Video, or using it just as a spare scaler in case you have compatibility issues. Adam Cameron says they're using a component switch that only has one output, and they need two outputs, one to the TV and one to the capture card. Is it safe to use a cheap cable splitter? No. That means you're going to be drawing double the power from either the switch or the cable or the console itself. And if it's a passive switch, then you'll be pulling double the signal from the console, which isn't good. I've blown out a Super Nintendo that way in just a 5-minute test just to see if something worked. I ended up blowing out the amp chip because I had two RGB outputs connected to it at the same time. So no, I wouldn't recommend that. If you need dual component output, the G-SCART switch 8x2 is expensive, but you get what you pay for. It does exactly what you need, and you don't have to worry about anything whatsoever. So, unfortunately, the only other things you could try to do is get things like signal splitters. Extron used to make a bunch of stuff like this, so you'd have like component video distribution amps, and you can find them pretty cheap. But now, you're having one switch go into one of these used equipment, not sure what condition they're in. So you have a chance of going on eBay and getting a very cheap, component splitter or component distribution amp, whatever name it's under. You have a chance of doing that and having a perfect setup. But there's also a chance of you wasting some money on used equipment. So for whatever, I would just think about as a whole what's best for your setup. I just really like the G-Comp 8x2 just because it's as good as it gets for retro gaming, because that's what it was designed for. David Kenyon wanted to know what my audio setup is for my retro gaming setups. So first and foremost, I live in an apartment in Manhattan, and I like to be the invisible neighbor. I don't want to bother anybody. I don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to mind my business. So I do have a stereo with ELAC speakers it's for the money. It's absolutely awesome. I skimped out and got a really cheap Denon receiver, which is good, but I can't control the audio as much as I'd like to. I'd love to cut out the whole low end at night, like after 10 at night, so I don't make any noise. And then of course crank it up during the day, because with all the sirens and screams outside, you can't hear it anyway. But that's what I use when I really just want to sit down and immerse myself into a game. But for some older games, some old games have soundtracks that are amazing that I would listen to when I wasn't gaming, but others, they're really just there to provide background noise. So very often I'll use things like on that JVC TV, I'll just use the speakers that it's built into. I also use okay computer speakers, not like $10 junk bin ones. I do have a ton of those that I use for the carts and stuff just to be able to test sound, but a decent, not crappy set of computer speakers is something that's also pretty good. But if I lived somewhere different, I would have everything set up so that every time I rolled over a monitor, because everything's always on rolling carts for me, so every time I rolled over a different monitor, I'd plug video into that and audio into a stereo and use it through a surround sound, just to get the best experience out of it. But that's one of those things that bothers me less than video, because just like I said, some of these games have brilliant sound and others don't. So depending on the game, it might matter less. Paul Pastor wants to know if I'm aware of any high-quality RCA cables under 3 feet long that you could use for component video. I guess they have a 1.5-foot cable now that's not bad, but the shielding is too stiff, and the audio cables aren't shielded. So first and foremost, I asked Steve from HD Retrovision about this, and he said he had no plans of making the shorter ones just because it took so much effort to get the ones that they currently have out there as in a way that Steve would want them. He is kind of a perfectionist. The ones that I have used that somebody years ago sent me pictures of it cut open are the media bridge ones. These might even, no, I guess they don't unscrew. But they are very thick shielded cables, and they're not very easy to move around because, that's the whole point of a shielded thick cable like this. But I just bought a whole bunch of these. And an RCA cable is an RCA cable. You could use it for a component, audio, whatever. It doesn't really matter. So I just bought a bunch of these and used them as needed. And for short distances, I found that individual cables are easier to route. And then I just use zip ties to hold them into place. But I haven't cut these open myself. The brand is Media Bridge. And I guess the website on there is mediabridgeproducts.com. So if you get one of these, maybe order one extra, cut them open and double check, because you never know. Like, I'm always just so leery of companies that I don't personally know or have a history of buying products from, because you never know what's going to happen. Maybe they'll spend 5 years putting out amazing cables and then just get bought out by another company and have their name stuck on another cable line. Who knows? I'm not talking shit specifically about Media Bridge. I'm just saying in general, like, you never know. So if you're really serious about getting shielded cables and you need like 6 of them, get 7, cut one open, cut the head open, and make sure that it's built properly. And if not, send the other 6 back, But, unfortunately, other than doing that, I don't have a quick and easy link for you to click on. So hopefully you could just look these up, maybe find them on Amazon or somewhere, and see what you find. Martin Lowe said they got a Dreamcast set up with a decent quality PC monitor via a cheap Dreamcast to VGA cable outputting 480p. At some point, they'd like to go straight to DC HDMI, and they're budgeting for that now. Would they see a significant improvement with a device such as a Toro? And while they appreciate that decent cables and upscalers and lag-free solutions make a big difference for 16-bit machines, is it necessary for the Dreamcast? So all great questions. I'll address each one. First and foremost, if your current cable setup is working fine, you should be good to go. Years ago, I had a cheap VGA cable where on a VGA monitor, I'd be using it, and randomly I'd get like a line of horizontal interference shoot up on through the middle of the screen. And as soon as I tossed that in the garbage and upgraded to a Toro, all of that went away. But if you have a solution that doesn't do that, it just looks fine, leave it alone. It's totally fine. And with a PC monitor, you're not going to be able to use 480i anyway. So the only games that you'd be missing are the ones that you could do the switch trick with. And if you're using a GDMU, you could do that automatically. So, if your setup's working fine now, as much as I'm still a fan of the Toro, and no disrespect at all to the Behar brothers, if your setup's working fine now, I would save that money and just save up for the DC HDMI. Funny, I am going to be doing a video soon that shows the difference when you're using the DC HDMI in 480p mode through an HDMI to VGA converter into a really nice PC monitor versus direct VGA with a nice shielded cable. There's like 1% difference, but hardcore Dreamcast fans would want that for both. And once again, just to be very clear, I'm not trying to say people should get the DC HDMI just to use VGA. But if you already have the DC HDMI and you also want to sometimes use it on your PC monitor, you might actually be able to get a very small bump in quality using it that way due to the way that the signal's processed. So that's just random aside. And lastly, the whole thing about lag-free solutions for 16-bit machines versus the Dreamcast, it's equally as important. But one very lucky thing is that many solutions out there for things like the Dreamcast, the PS2, the Wii, and I think even the Xbox, any of those solutions that are simply analog to digital converters with nothing else in there, that won't add any lag, and it might not be the best look. But in my very strong opinion, that's not experience ruining. So somebody a while back sent me some cheap Dreamcast cables to review, And I replied immediately asking them a bunch of questions after I got it and never heard from them again because I think they realized very quickly I wasn't one of those hold up and talk about YouTube shillers, so they didn't want anything to do with me. But to be perfectly honest, that was like a $20 solution, and it's fine. And I'd rather support the retro gaming community and buy the Gecko, but solutions that just simply digitize a signal don't ruin it. I've seen lots of people come back with screenshots where they make white screens kind of grayish. There's a little bit of interference, but there's no lag added, and you don't get that weird shakiness that you do if 240p is processed wrong. So stuff like that is perfectly fine to use. However, any of the stuff, and I think it's mostly with the PS2, might happen with the Xbox as well, but any of those cables that are the same 720p upscaling cables, those are the ones that are all using the same video chips to process the signal. So I'm probably using the wrong wording, but they're chips designed for TV signals, not video game signals. So that's why you get the 3 to 4 frames of lag, and that's why you get the image processed wrong. And that is experience ruining. It changes the way things are. So, if your question was, do you want to worry about digital solutions like HDMI plug and plays for these things? As long as they're not scaling, you should be fine. And I think you'll be good with most Dreamcast and Xbox and Wii solutions. I think it's only the PS2 ones that you still have both versions going through. And I really hope to do a video on this soon. It's going to be a short video and not nearly as fancy as the other ones that I've been doing, because it's pretty much going to be a video that says exactly what I just said to you, but, with some fancy pictures. So hopefully I laid it all out there for you and answered all your questions. Semper Julio 7 had an interesting question. They own a Sony 4K TV and normally watch it using vivid mode as they prefer the bright colors. And that's all preference. I think a lot of people get really bent out of shape for people that don't calibrate their TVs a certain way, but preference is preference. But recently, they've been using the game mode to make sure you don't have lag issues, but don't like the way the picture looks in this mode. Are you going against the purpose of game mode if you manually adjust the brightness and contrast settings in this mode? So to answer that question, I don't think so. I think once it's in game mode, that it switched to an overall low lag mode. I would still set the sharpness to 0 or 1, and if you have a time sleuth, I would definitely double check if that makes a difference, and I would make sure that all extra processing is turned off. Once again, verify this with a time sleuth if you have one, just to make sure. But I don't think jacking up the color and the contrast settings would make any difference in latency at all. So if that's how you prefer to do it, give it a try. And to be honest, this is really where, you're one of the many scenarios in which I would suggest investing in a time sleuth, because you could test all this yourself. And, on your TV, if you have 2 frames of lag in game mode and 3 frames of lag in vivid mode, maybe that's the look that you're going for. Maybe that's worth it. If it's the opposite, if you got 1 frame of lag in game mode and 5 in vivid, don't do that. But, that's a great scenario, and really, I'm happy that there are tools out there that allow you to test it. So either pick up a time sleuth or maybe see if there's somebody relatively close to you that would let you borrow it. And I would just tweak it in that mode, see how you like it, verify that it's not killing the latency, and go from there. But as a general answer to your question, I think if you're in game mode and you crank up the brightness and contrast to your liking, and the color setting and all that, color and tint, I don't think it would affect anything other than just the way the image looks. And the last question you had is, am I able to use the Genesis HD Retrovision 1 adapter on the Rad2X Genesis Model 2 cable? Already answered that before. I will eventually test all of the other HD Retrovision adapters to see how they work, but it's really going to be more of like a basic, let's see if this works type of thing. I'm not going to go deep into video comparison and all that stuff, because that's really not what the Rad2X is designed for. Respectfully, it's just meant to be, I need a solution to work on my TV. I'll mess with it later if I feel like I need something better. So it should work, but I guess I'll find out eventually. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks so much to everybody who participates in these. And just a quick reminder to any newcomers, any questions at all that you have, just ask in the newest Q&A video, wherever it is that you support. I can't really go back into the older videos to check for comments or updates, just just because of the way that these things are laid out. And also, I turn off all the comments on the YouTube videos just because this is really a thank you and a focus to all the supporters. No disrespect to anybody else, but I do make these public after about a month for everybody just as a courtesy, but this is really a giant thank you to all of you. So thank you so much to everybody for supporting, for participating, for listening, and just for being fans of retro gaming. So thanks again, and I'll see you next week.